I always wake up at dawn. At my age, sleep becomes a capricious friend, showing up uninvited in the middle of the day and refusing to come at night. My doctor says it's normal for 73 years old, but I know it's not my age. Insomnia has been my faithful companion since Arthur left this world. 6 years ago. 6 long years I wake up and the first thing I do is turn to his empty half of the bed. The Goodyear morning sun mercilessly exposes the wrinkles on my arms. I contemplate them while I make my invariable morning coffee. Dark, no sugar. Sometimes I think these hands belong to someone else's old woman, not Veronica Abernathy, wife of the famous jeweler Arthur Abernathy, owner of the Heritage Jewelry Store on Clapton Avenue. The store has long since been sold. All that remains are the memories and photos on my living room walls, and of course, the necklace. I touch it, the only thing I wear every morning, even if I'm not going out anywhere. Abernathy's ruby necklace. 5 generations of women in our family have worn it at the most important moments of their lives. Not that it was incredibly expensive. Arthur said its material value was not as great as its historical value. Every stone in this necklace is a story. The center ruby, the largest, was the first Abernathy brought back from Burma in the mid-19th century. His son added the next two after a successful expedition to Thailand, and so on, generation after generation. Arthur added the last stone, a small but perfect-colored ruby, on the day our son Hubert was born. So he would remember that the most precious things are not created in a day, Arthur said at the time. Ironically, Hubert was never interested in stones or family history. Books, numbers, laws. That's what attracted my son. He became an attorney specializing in corporate law, and I'm proud of him. At least I've tried to be proud over the years. I bring my cup of coffee to my lips and flinch at the ringing of the phone. At this hour, I only get calls from telemarketers or Hubert. My heart takes a treacherous leap of hope. Good morning, Mom. His voice sounds businesslike and detached. Hubert, I answer simply, trying not to show how happy I am to hear from him. I hope I didn't wake you. There's no real concern in his voice, just formal politeness. At my age, Dawn is the best friend, I reply. Is something wrong? Why would something happen? There's irritation in his voice. I'm calling to talk to my mother. Is that so strange? Yeah. I feel like answering me. Yeah, it is weird. You call me once a month, you come over for Christmas with Tabitha, and you both look at your watches every 15 minutes like you're doing your chores. Of course not, I say instead. I'm just surprised. Tabitha and I are having a small reception in honor of our 10th wedding anniversary, he says after a pause. This Saturday. We'd love to have you among the guests. I almost dropped my cup. 10 years. Has it really been 10 years since I sat in the front row of St. Paul's and watched my son marry a woman who looked at me with ill-concealed contempt? That's very nice of you, I reply cautiously. But I'm not sure I can… Mom, his voice is getting harder. This is an important day for us. I know you and Tabitha don't have the warmest relationship, but she's my wife. And we're inviting you here as family. Family. That word resonates painfully with me. How long ago did we stop being a real family? Since Arthur's death, perhaps? Or before? Of course I'll come, I agree. What time? 6 o'clock tonight. We'll send you a formal invitation. His voice warms. Thank you, Mom. When the conversation ends, I'm left sitting with my phone in my hands. Something doesn't feel right about this sudden invitation. Hubert and Tabitha have never been particularly keen on having me at their events. I'm too old-fashioned, too straightforward. Tabitha once told Hubert, thinking I couldn't hear, that I was spoiling the atmosphere. I get up and walk over to the hallway mirror. The necklace glistens in the morning light, the rubies seeming like drops of blood on my wrinkled neck. It doesn't make me younger or prettier, but when I put it on, I feel connected to the past, to Arthur, to who I once was. The day I first wore this necklace, I was 22 years old. My marriage to Arthur was modest. His parents didn't approve of our marriage. I was just a saleswoman in their jewelry store, and he was the heir to a dynasty of jewelers. But Arthur insisted on the wedding, and his grandmother, against her son's wishes, gave us a family heirloom. Veronica, she said to me as she fastened the necklace around my neck. It's not just a piece of jewelry. It's a responsibility. You will be the keeper of our family's history. Someday you will pass it on to the next generation. Choose the right one. There was a subtext in her words. She knew her son and daughter-in-law thought I was unworthy, but she saw something in me that others didn't. When Hubert was born, I thought I knew who I would give the necklace to. His future wife, the woman who would give birth to the next generation of Abernathy. But as the years passed, I saw my son change, how he drifted away from family tradition, from me, from everything Arthur and I had tried to instill in him. And then Tabitha came along, beautiful, ambitious, with a sharp mind and an equally sharp smile. She opened a contemporary art gallery in downtown Goodyear and quickly gained a certain status in town. Hubert fell in love with her at first sight. I felt uneasy at first sight. "She's using you," I told Hubert when he announced the engagement. "She wants your status, your money. It was a mistake, a huge mistake that only pushed my son further away." He didn't speak to me for 2 months after that conversation. He didn't come back until after Arthur had his first heart attack. At the wedding, I sat with a strained smile and thought about Arthur's grandmother's words. Choose a worthy one. Tabitha didn't seem worthy to me. But the choice wasn't mine. Hubert had made it for me. After Arthur died, things got worse. Hubert and Tabitha came less and less. Their visits became a formality, cold and unpleasant for all of us. I could see Tabitha looking at my house, the old but well-kept house on the outskirts of Goodyear where Arthur and I had lived all our lives, with barely concealed contempt. The way she appraises everything, as if estimating its value. I caught her looking at my necklace once when I thought I was asleep after dinner. "It's a beautiful piece," she said without embarrassment. "A family heirloom?" "Yes," I answered dryly. "It's only passed down to the worthy." She smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "A charming tradition," she said. "So, old-fashioned. Since that incident, I've noticed the way she looks at the necklace every time she sees it on me. A greed she can't hide. So I started wearing it all the time, even at home when no one's home. Stupid, I guess. But it was my way of protecting what little was left of the past. The doorbell jolts me out of my memories. A courier with a bouquet of flowers. The traditional roses Hubert sends me on my birthday, at Christmas, and sometimes for no reason at all when he feels guilty about being away for so long. Attached to the bouquet is an envelope, an invitation to their anniversary party. I open the envelope. Inside is an elegant card with gold embossing. "Dear Veronica, we invite you to a gala reception in honor of a decade of our marriage. Your presence will be a special gift to us. Love, Hubert and Tabitha." Tabitha's handwriting. She always writes on their behalf. I wonder if Hubert knows she calls me Veronica on the invitation and not Mom, as he's asked her to do for years. I cover my eyes and feel my throat constrict. 10 years. 10 years of trying to have a relationship with the woman who became my son's wife. 10 years of awkward conversations, strained smiles, and carefully measured compliments that masked mutual dislike and distrust. The invitation falls from my suddenly weakened fingers. Something is wrong. Something is definitely wrong. Tabitha would never insist on my presence unless she had a reason to. I walk over to the phone and dial the number. My trembling fingers miss the buttons and I have to start over. "Walt Prescott, private investigation," a familiar husky voice answers. "Walt, this is Veronica Abernathy," I say, trying to keep my voice firm. "Mrs. Abernathy," his voice warms. "It's good to hear from you. How are you?" "Good, Walt." I take a deep breath. "I have a job for you. Something to do with my previous request." There's a pause. "Are you sure?" he finally asks. I look at the invitation on the floor, at the photograph of Arthur on the mantelpiece, at my reflection in the mirror where the ruby necklace catches the sunlight. "Yes," I answer firmly. "I'm sure of it." After my conversation with Walt, I stand at the window for a long time, looking out at my garden. Arthur loved to tend it, and after he died, I took over, even though I never shared his passion for plants. Now it's become a way for me to be closer to him. The roses he planted the year Hubert was born are still blooming. I go out into the garden and cut one, a dark red, almost the color of the rubies in my necklace. Returning to the house, I accidentally scratch my hand on the thorn. A tiny drop of blood protrudes on my wrinkled skin. I stare at it, and a strange premonition overwhelms me. Something is going to happen at this reception, something that will change our relationship forever. I don't know if it's good or bad, but I know I have to be ready. I walk to my dresser and open the top drawer. Under a stack of scarves is the jewelry box Arthur handmade for me on our first anniversary. I open it and pull out an envelope containing the documents Walt Prescott gave me 2 years ago. Proof of something I didn't want to see, but that could protect me if I had to. I put the documents back away and close the box. I make the decision to go to the appointment. Not because I expect anything good to come of it, but because I feel it. It's time to end this cold war between me and my son's family. Anyway. Saturday morning found me in front of an open closet. The problem of choosing an outfit has never confronted me as much as it does today. I'm 73 years old, and most of my dresses are comfortable, practical pieces I wear to weekly book club meetings or Sunday lunches at the Bluebird Cafe. But today is no ordinary day. Today is the 10-year anniversary of my son's marriage. I pulled a navy blue dress from the depths of my closet. Arthur had given it to me on our last anniversary together. Blue is the color of wisdom and depth, he'd said then, and you are the wisest woman I know. Not true, I wanted to tell him. If I were wise, our son wouldn't avoid us, wouldn't marry a woman who uses him. If I were wise, I'd know how to fix all my mistakes. The dress still fit well, though it was a little looser. The years had taken away not only my youth, but a few pounds as well. I examined myself critically in the mirror. A straight back, something left over from my strict mother's upbringing. Gray hair gathered into a neat bundle, no attempt to look younger than I am. And of course, the necklace. The rubies glittered in the morning light, a reminder of bygone times. Each stone was the story of the Abernathy family, a story Hubert never wanted to know. Maybe that was my mistake. I couldn't interest my son in our past, our traditions. The present and the future were always more important to him. School grades, university, career. I tried to instill in him a love for the family business, but I only pushed him away with my persistence. I don't want to be a jeweler, Mom, he told me at 16 when I tried for the 100th time to get him to sit at Arthur's workbench. I want to be a lawyer, defend justice. Arthur and I laughed at his youthful maximalism, but he did become a lawyer. But instead of defending justice, he went into corporate law. Lucrative, prestigious, and very far from his romantic notions of justice. At 22, he got his first serious fee and moved into his own apartment. At 27, he became a partner in a law firm. At 35, he married Tabitha. Each step took him further and further away from us, from the Abernathy family tradition. I sighed and closed my closet. There was no point in changing the outfit. Tabitha would find something to pick on anyway. Too old-fashioned, too somber, too much. I was always too much in her eyes. The clock read almost noon. The reception was 6 hours away, but I still had to stop by the hairdresser and buy a gift. What do you get for a decade of marriage? Tin or aluminum, if you believe in tradition. Not the most noble metals. Symbolic. Lillian's hairdressing salon greeted me with the smell of hairspray and the sounds of another reality show on TV. Lillian, a dyed blonde of indeterminate age, waved me over. Mrs. Abernathy, the usual? No, Lillian, I smiled. Today is a special occasion, my son's wedding anniversary. Her eyes lit up with curiosity. Small town Goodyear. Everybody knows everybody, and everybody loves to gossip. Oh, that handsome lawyer, she exclaimed. And how are they getting on with that artist? The gallerist, I corrected her. They're fine. 10 years together. Wow, Lillian whistled. That's an eternity nowadays. What are we going to do with the hair? Something elegant, but not too fancy. As Lillian worked on my hair, I thought about what might have happened if I'd handled my relationship with my sister-in-law differently. Maybe if I hadn't been so critical, so direct. Arthur always said that my honesty is both my strength and my weakness. You can't lie, Veronica, he used to say. Even for the good, it's true. I couldn't pretend to approve of my son's choice. I pushed them both away. It's done. Lillian turned me around to the mirror. Do you like it? I saw an older woman with neat hair, a straight back and sad eyes. A woman who was going to the party with a heavy heart. Yes, Lillian. Thank you. After the hair salon, I stopped at the mall to buy a gift. I finally settled on a pair of crystal glasses. Not pewter or aluminum, but something they could use together. A symbol of unity I'd never felt between us. When I got home, it was still 3 hours before the reception started. I pulled out the papers I'd kept in Arthur's jewelry box and looked through them carefully once more. Walt Prescott's reports, photographs, account statements. Evidence that Tabitha's gallery operation wasn't as transparent as it seemed, that some of the paintings she was selling were of questionable provenance. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think that my son might have been involved in something illegal. But the facts were stubborn. Walt wouldn't lie to me. I put the documents back in the box. I wasn't going to use them today. I hoped I'd never have to. But I had to be ready for anything. At 6:30, I hailed a cab. Hubert and Tabitha's house was in the upscale Goodyear neighborhood, a 20-minute drive from my humble abode. A colonial-style mansion with immaculate lawns and marble columns, as cold and spotless as their attitude toward me. The cab driver, a young guy with an earpiece in his ear, cast an appraising glance at me. "Where are we going, Grandma?" "23 Oakhurst Street," I replied, ignoring the familiarity. "And I'm not your grandmother." He hummed and turned on the meter. We were silent the whole way, which was fine with me. I looked out the window at the Goodyear houses floating by, at the people going about their Saturday business, and thought about how this town had changed in the 50 years I'd lived here. Once upon a time, everyone here knew each other. Now the city has grown, with new neighborhoods, shopping centers, and office buildings. Abernathy's Heritage Jewelry Store, once a Main Street landmark, is now a part of history. In its place was a trendy restaurant. "Here we are," the driver announced, stopping in front of the mansion's gate. I paid and got out of the car. There was a uniformed guard at the gate Tabitha always liked to impress. I called out my name, and he checked the list. "Come on in, Mrs. Abernathy," he nodded. Straight down the path to the main entrance. The path was paved with marble tiles and framed by perfectly trimmed bushes. Not a single leaf dared to stand out. As in Tabitha's life, everything had to be perfect. The door was opened by the butler, another excess Tabitha considered necessary to maintain her status. "Good evening, Mrs. Abernathy," he bowed. "Let me take your coat." I handed him my light coat and a gift box of glasses. "It's for the owners," I explained. "For the 10th anniversary." He nodded and pointed toward the living room, where the sounds of muffled conversations and soft music could be heard. I took a deep breath and stepped into the room. Hubert and Tabitha's living room was spacious, with high ceilings and huge windows overlooking the manicured garden. There were about 30 guests gathered here now. Hubert's colleagues, Tabitha's acquaintances from the art world, a few neighbors. I noticed Hubert at once. He was standing by the fireplace, talking to a man in an expensive suit. My son had always been a handsome man, tall, with dark hair and clear features inherited from his father. But the years had given his appearance something tough that wasn't there before. The wrinkles around his eyes formed not from laughter, but from constant tension. I headed toward him, but Tabitha intercepted me. She appeared out of nowhere, in an elegant cream dress, a glass of champagne in her hand. "Veronica," she exclaimed with a strained smile. "How nice of you to be able to come." "I wouldn't have missed such an important day," I replied, trying to sound sincere. She looked me over with an appraising gaze, from my hair to my shoes. I could almost physically feel her mental criticism. "You look very elegant," she said at last. "That necklace, a family heirloom, isn't it?" Her gaze lingered on the rubies. I instinctively touched the center stone. "Yes, it's been in the Abernathy family for 5 generations." "Delightful." Her smile grew wider, but her eyes remained cold. "I must greet the other guests. Hubert will be pleased to see you." She disappeared into the crowd, and I remained standing, feeling strangely uneasy. Something in her gaze, in her tone, in the very atmosphere of the evening alarmed me. I took a glass of champagne from the tray of a passing waiter and made my way toward Hubert. He spotted me when I was a few feet away. "Mom!" He smiled and came over to give me a hug. "You came." "Of course," I replied, pulling away slightly to look at him. How could I have missed a day like this? His smile seemed genuine, but I could see the tension in the corners of his eyes. "You look nice," he said. "That dress." Your father gave it to you, didn't he? I nodded, surprised that he remembered. For our last anniversary. He always knew how to choose gifts. Hubert sipped from his glass. Unlike me, I still don't know what to get Tabitha today. I'm sure she'd love anything, I said, though I wasn't sure I would. The conversation was interrupted by the clinking of glasses as Tabitha caught the guest's attention. Dear friends, she announced, standing in the center of the room. Thank you for sharing this special evening with us. 10 years ago, Hubert and I made a promise to each other to be together for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. And here we are, 10 years later, still together. The guests applauded. I noticed Hubert tense beside me. We have a special program for you tonight, Tabitha continued. But first, a toast to the family, to all the Abernathys past, present, and future. She raised her glass and looked directly at me. There was something in her gaze that made me shudder inwardly, like she knew something I didn't, or was planning something I didn't even know. The guests raised their glasses. I raised mine too, never taking my eyes off Tabitha. Her smile grew wider when she noticed my confusion. After the toast, dinner began to be served. The guests were seated at a large table in the dining room. I was seated to Hubert's right, which was unusual. Usually at family dinners, I sat somewhere at the end of the table, away from the center of attention. Tabitha sat on the other side of her husband, chatting animatedly with a man who was introduced as an art critic from New York. I caught scraps of their conversation, something about an exhibition Tabitha was planning at her gallery. It's going to be sensational, she was saying. We'll be showing works that no one has seen in years, real treasures. The critic looked impressed. But how did you manage to find them? These paintings don't usually appear on the market. Tabitha smiled enigmatically. I have my sources. And of course, my husband's legal support is invaluable. She put her hand on Hubert's shoulder, who was at that moment talking to me about something completely distracting, the weather, I think. He flinched at her touch and turned to her. Yes, darling. I was just telling you about your invaluable help with the new exhibition, she murmured. About how you're helping me with all the boring legal details. It's my duty, he replied with a strained smile. As a husband and as a lawyer, something in that exchange seemed fake to me, like they were playing parts for an audience, or for each other. After the main course, Tabitha drew the guests' attention again by tapping her fork on her glass. Friends, before dessert, Hubert and I had a special announcement to make. I tensed. This was what this party was all about. Hubert and I have decided to expand our family, Tabitha announced with a wide smile. My heart jumped. Really? We're opening a new gallery branch in New York, she finished her sentence. A murmur of approval swept through the room. Someone began to applaud. I felt a pang of disappointment. For a moment, I thought they were going to announce a baby. And, Tabitha continued, we're moving there next month. Hubert got an offer from a prestigious law firm that he couldn't refuse. I turned to my son, but he avoided my gaze. This was something he hadn't mentioned when he called me with the party invitation. This big decision that meant we'd see each other even less often. That's wonderful news, I said, trying to sound sincere. Congratulations to both of you. Hubert finally looked at me. Thank you, Mom. I wanted to tell you earlier, but Tabitha insisted on the surprise. Tabitha tapped the glass again. One more thing. In honor of our 10th anniversary and new beginning, we've decided to update our image. A fresh start. Her gaze stopped on me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Something in her eyes, in her smile, made me wary. A new beginning, she repeated, not taking her eyes off me. Without the old baggage. Our eyes met, and I saw something in her gaze that I hadn't noticed before. Not just dislike or annoyance, but real hostility. Like she was challenging me, or warning me about something. Tabitha turned away and continued her conversation with the critic, and I remained seated, feeling my heart clench. Something was coming, something imminent, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. After dinner, the guests moved back into the living room where the dancing began. I stepped aside, watching Hubert and Tabitha twirl in the center of the room to a slow tune. They looked like the perfect couple, he in his expensive suit, she in her elegant dress. but I could see the tension in my son's shoulders, see his legs moving mechanically. Arthur's told me a lot about you. Said you were his guiding star. I felt tears come to my throat. Arthur never said those words to me. That's just like him, I said quietly. He always had a way with words. George looked at the dancing couple. Hubert is like him in looks, but in character. He shook his head. Arthur had never been so ambitious, so cold. I noticed Tabitha whisper something in his ear, and he nodded. Then she headed toward me with a glass in her hand and a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Veronica, she said, you must be exhausted. Perhaps you would like to rest in the library? It's quieter there. It wasn't a question, it was an instruction. Thank you, Tabitha, I replied. But I'm quite comfortable here. Her smile became strained. I insist. In fact, Hubert and I wanted to talk to you alone. About our move. And other, important things. I felt my stomach clench. This is it. This was what she'd organized this evening for. Okay, I agreed. Lead the way. George squeezed my hand for support as I said goodbye. I could see the worry in his eyes, like he sensed something bad was going on. Tabitha led me through the living room to the door leading to the library. On the way, she stopped and whispered something to the waiter. He nodded and hurried out the door. Hubert was waiting for us in the library. He was standing at the window, looking out into the garden. When we entered, he turned around, and I saw a strange expression on his face, a mixture of guilt and determination. Mother, he said, we need to talk. The library in Hubert's house had always been my favorite place. The dark wood walls, the floor-to-ceiling bookcases, the leather chairs, it reminded me of Arthur's study in our old house. I knew Hubert had recreated this atmosphere on purpose, though he'd never admitted it. A small tribute to his father, whom he had loved despite our differences. But today the library seemed cold and unwelcoming. Tabitha closed the door behind us, cutting off the muffled sounds of the party. Hubert stood by the fireplace, staring at the fire instead of looking at me. Tabitha took up a position beside him, too close for casual conversation, too far away for intimate conversation. It was like they were building a front against me. So I began to break the tension. You're moving to New York. Hubert nodded, still avoiding my gaze. It's a great opportunity for both of us. The new firm has offered me a partnership, and Tabitha will be able to expand her gallery. I'm happy for you, I replied, and it was true. Despite our difficulties, I wanted the best for my son. When do you plan to move? In a month, Tabitha replied with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. Everything's already decided. We bought an apartment on the Upper East Side, overlooking Central Park. I thought about the distance that would now separate us. Goodyear and New York aren't just different cities, they're worlds apart. Our already infrequent meetings would become even more infrequent. We wanted to talk to you about something else, Hubert continued, finally looking me in the eye. There was something in his gaze that I couldn't read. About our relationship. I tensed. We'd never talked about it directly, about the chasm that grew between us with each passing year, about the coldness that replaced the former closeness. I'm listening, I said, sitting down in the chair by the fireplace. My legs were suddenly weak. Hubert glanced over at Tabitha, and she nodded faintly, as if giving him permission to continue. Mother, he began, and I caught the false note in his voice, as if he'd rehearsed this speech many times. Tabitha and I are starting a new life, and we want to put the past behind us. I understand, I replied, though I didn't really understand what he was getting at. No, you don't, Tabitha interjected sharply. We're talking about a clean break. We're talking about a clean slate, without baggage. She looked at me like I was the baggage. I felt my heart clench, but I kept my expression calm. You're my mother, Hubert continued in a softer tone, and I'll always be grateful for everything you've done for me. But Tabitha and I think we need space. Our new life in New York gives us that chance. Are you suggesting I don't keep in touch? I asked bluntly, feeling the chill building inside me. For a while, he answered quickly, so that we can adapt. Hubert is too polite to be blunt, Tabitha interrupted him. But the thing is, Veronica, your constant interference in our lives, your criticism of my decisions, your disapproval of our marriage, it's all becoming unbearable. We want to be happy without the constant guilt and judgment. I felt the blood rush to my face. When have I interfered in your life? When was the last time I criticized you, Tabitha? I call once a month, we see each other at Christmas, and I sit quietly so I don't disrupt your perfect life. Hubert raised his hand, trying to calm the situation. Mother, please, we don't want to fight, especially today, on our anniversary. Then why did you start this conversation today? I asked, trying to control myself. Because we want to be honest, he answered. And because there was something else we wanted to talk about. Tabitha stepped closer, her eyes shining with anticipation. The Abernathy necklace, she said, looking at the rubies around my neck. Hubert told me about the family tradition, about it being passed down from generation to generation. I instinctively touched the center stone. Yeah, so what? We're moving to New York, starting a new life, opening a new chapter in the history of the Abernathy family, Tabitha continued with a smile that didn't hide her greed. I think it's time for the legacy to be passed on. I looked at Hubert, not believing my ears. You want me to give away a family heirloom that your great-great-grandmother brought back from Burma? The one your father added in honor of your birth? Just like that? Not just like that, Mom, he replied. And there was a steely note in his voice that I hadn't heard before. But it's a tradition. It's meant to be passed on to the next generation. When you have a child, I will gladly pass the necklace on, I replied coldly. That is the custom in the Abernathy family, not before. Tabitha laughed, an unpleasant, harsh laugh. Oh, Veronica, you always find a way to get away with it, don't you? We know you'd never willingly part with him. So we've decided to speed things up. Hubert looked uncertain, but Tabitha pushed him forward. Go ahead, tell her. This is your family, your legacy. He took a deep breath. We're going back to the guests, and I will announce the passing of the necklace to Tabitha as a symbol of the new Abernathy era. You can't do that, I whispered, feeling the ground go from under my feet. This is my decision, my necklace. No, Mom. There was a foreign tone in his voice, words he'd learned but didn't feel. It's a family heirloom, not your personal property, and as head of the family, I have the right to decide who wears it. The head of the family? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Your father, dead for 6 years, he cut me off abruptly. And I'm tired of you using his memory to manipulate me. That's enough, Mom. It's time to let go of the past. Tabitha stood behind his shoulder, eyes gleaming with triumph. This was her idea, her plan. I saw it as clearly as I saw the rubies around her neck. If you're so eager to start fresh, I said, rising from my chair, if you're so eager to put the past behind you, why do you need an ancient family heirloom? Isn't that baggage? Oh, Veronica, Tabitha smiled indulgently. You know very well that it's not just a piece of metal with stones. It's a symbol, a status, history, something that gives weight to the name Abernathy. And I thought the Abernathy name had weight because of generations of hard work and integrity, not because of bling. I used the word deliberately to see her wince. That's enough, Hubert said. We're going back to the guests. And you're coming with us, Mother. I straightened, trying to appear taller than I was. And if I refuse? Then you're no longer part of the Abernathy family, he answered, and I could see the determination in his eyes. I will disown you publicly. I felt the world collapse around me. My son, my only child for whom I would give my life, was standing in front of me, threatening to disown me because of the necklace, because of the woman who manipulated him. Okay, I said quietly. I'll come with you. We returned to the living room, where the guests were still dancing and talking. No one noticed our absence. No one had any idea of the drama that had played out behind the closed doors of the library. Hubert led me to the center of the room and gestured for the musicians to stop playing. Dear friends, he announced in a loud voice when the music stopped, we have another surprise tonight. The guests gathered around, curious, smiling, unsuspecting. I noticed George Hampton in the corner of the room, his face expressing concern. Tonight, Tabitha and I are not only celebrating 10 years of marriage, not only announcing a new chapter in our lives in New York, but continuing a family tradition, Hubert said as if he were making a courtroom speech, confident, persuasive, but without soul. the tradition of passing on a family heirloom to the next generation. The eyes of everyone present turned to me, or rather, to the necklace around my neck. I stood straight, not showing the fear that was eating me up inside. My mother, Veronica Abernathy, has worn this necklace with dignity for many years, Hubert continued. But the time has come for a new keeper, for a woman to lead the Abernathy family into the future. He turned to me, and for a moment something flashed in his eyes. Regret? Doubt? But it vanished when Tabitha squeezed his hand. Mom, he said, holding out his hand. The necklace, please. The room fell into complete silence. I stood there, unmoving, feeling the stares of dozens of people on me. Time stretched out. Seconds turned into hours. No, I said quietly but firmly. Hubert's face tensed. Mom, please don't make a scene. Not here, not now. I'm not making a scene. I'm saying no. It's my right. Tabitha stepped forward. Veronica, you don't want to ruin our party with your stubbornness, do you? Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were cold. Think of Hubert. Think of his reputation. I've been thinking of Hubert all my life, I replied. About his welfare, his happiness. So you refuse? I could hear the threat in her voice. Yes. Tabitha turned to Hubert. You heard her. She refuses to honor family tradition, Abernathy traditions. Hubert took a step toward me, his face contorted with anger, real or artfully portrayed, I couldn't tell. You've always been like this, Mother, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Controlling, manipulative. You never accepted my choices, my life. Hubert, I tried to object, but he continued, raising his voice. You criticize my career, my wife, my decisions. You despised Tabitha from day one, even though she tried to approach you. That's not true. I felt tears coming to my eyes, but I held them back. Not here. Not in front of these people. It's time to end this. His voice grew harder. If you won't hand over the necklace willingly, then you have no respect for our traditions. Then you're not worthy to wear it. Before I realized what was happening, he stepped toward me and ripped the necklace from my neck with a sharp movement. The clasp, which Arthur had once fastened with his own hand, snapped and cracked. I felt a sharp pain as the chain dug into my skin, and then the necklace was in Hubert's hands. There was a deafening silence in the room. The guests froze, shocked by what was happening. I stood still, feeling a thin trickle of blood trickling down my neck as the clasp scratched my skin. Hubert seemed, for a moment, shocked at what he'd done. He looked at the necklace in his hand, then at me, and something like horror flashed in his eyes. But Tabitha was quickly at his side, taking the jewelry from his fingers. It's yours now, Hubert said, turning to his wife but looking at me. My mother doesn't deserve to wear it. Tabitha, with a triumphant smile, allowed Hubert to clasp the necklace around her neck. The rubies contrasted vividly with her pale skin, seeming foreign, out of place. It's beautiful, she murmured, stroking the center stone. And now it's where it should be. I felt the room begin to spin before my eyes. Shock, humiliation, pain, all mixed into one unbearable feeling. But I couldn't let myself faint. Not here. Not now. If you're done with that performance, I said quietly, but loud enough for Hubert and Tabitha to hear, I need to use your bathroom. Without waiting for an answer, I turned and walked out of the living room. No one followed me. No one tried to stop me. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, found the bathroom, and locked the door behind me. Only then did I let the tears flow. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, an elderly woman with a thin red stripe on her neck, eyes wet with tears, hands shaking. You're a fool, Veronica, I whispered to my reflection. An old, blind fool. I washed my face with cold water, trying to clean myself up. I wiped away my tears, blotted the scratch on my neck. I had to decide what to do next. Leave quietly, with my dignity intact, or I took my cell phone out of my purse and dialed a number I knew by heart. Walt Prescott, private investigation. A familiar voice answered. Walt, it's Veronica Abernathy, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Remember we talked about the file folder? Yes, he answered cautiously. What's wrong? I need you to bring it over, right now, 23 Oakhurst. It's urgent. He didn't talk for a second. Are you sure, Veronica? It's, an irreversible step. I've never been so sure, I replied. And Walt, Bring the necklace files too, the ones we prepared just in case. I'll be there in an hour, he said after a pause. Stay there. I ended the call and put my phone back in my purse. I took a deep breath, straightened up, and opened the bathroom door. George Hampton, Arthur's old friend, was standing in the hallway. I saw what happened, he said quietly. It's unacceptable. Thank you, George, I replied. But this is a family matter. Arthur would roll over in his grave if he saw what his son did. The old man shook his head. I knew them both, Veronica. Both Arthur and his father. They would never have approved of such behavior. I smiled weakly. It doesn't matter anymore. What's done is done. He looked at me carefully. You have a plan, don't you? I can see it in your eyes. It was the same look Arthur had when he was preparing for a decisive move. Maybe, I answered evasively. But right now I need to get back to my guests and save face. Will you help me with that? George offered me his hand and I accepted it gratefully. We went downstairs where the fun seemed to have resumed. Music was playing, people were dancing and talking as if nothing had happened. Only some of the guests threw sympathetic or curious glances in my direction. I spotted Tabitha in the center of a group of women. She was showing off a necklace, saying something with lively gestures. The rubies glittered in the chandelier light like drops of blood. Hubert stood off to the side, talking to some man in a suit. But his gaze kept returning to his wife, and in that gaze there was something strange, not pride, not love, but rather anxiety. Anxiety? I decided to stay away from both of them. With George's help, I made my way to a secluded corner of the living room, where I could sit and watch in relative peace. The time dragged agonizingly slow. I glanced at the clock, counting down the minutes until Walt arrived. George sat beside me, occasionally commenting on the guests, telling stories of the past, of when he and Arthur had been young. His presence was comforting. Exactly an hour after my call, when the festivities were in full swing, the doorbell rang. I straightened in my seat, feeling my heart start to beat faster. George noticed my reaction. Is your plan in motion? He asked quietly. Yes, I answered. And George, whatever happens in the next half hour, know that Arthur would approve. He squeezed my hand in encouragement. I have no doubt of it. The butler walked through the living room to the front door. I couldn't see who had come in, but I knew it was Walt. A few minutes later, the butler returned, accompanied by a tall man in a strict suit, folder in hand. Walt Prescott looked exactly the way an old-school private investigator should. Graying temples, shrewd eyes, restrained movements. He glanced around the room, noticed me, and nodded faintly. The butler approached Hubert, saying something quietly to him. My son frowned, looked toward Walt, then at me. His face changed when he realized who it was. Tabitha, noticing her husband's concern, interrupted her conversation and walked over to him. Walt took advantage of this moment to approach them. I watched as he introduced himself, as he held out a document, as Hubert's face paled. The guests, sensing the new tension in the room, gradually quieted down. The music continued to play, but people had stopped dancing, watching the scene at the entrance with curiosity. Tabitha was saying something fiercely to Walt, her hand instinctively going up to her necklace as if protecting it. Hubert looked confused, even frightened. He looked in my direction several times, and in his eyes I saw a question I already knew the answer to. What's going on? George asked, watching the scene unfold. Justice, I answered quietly. Or maybe revenge. It was hard to tell now. Walt Prescott stood in the center of the living room, as calm as a rock in a raging sea. The guests parted, forming a makeshift stage around him, Hubert and Tabitha. The music faded. One of the guests gestured for the musicians to stop playing. The silence in the room was almost palpable. I rose from my seat, leaning on George Hampton's arm, and slowly approached the group in the center. Hubert was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, a mixture of anger, fear, and perhaps shame. What does that mean, Mom? He asked as I drew closer. Who is this man and why does he say he's acting on your behalf? I looked at Walt, then back at my son. That's Walt Prescott, the private investigator, I answered calmly. And yes, he's acting on my behalf. Tabitha, standing next to Hubert, looked tense. Her hand was still on the necklace, as if she was afraid it might be taken away. Detective? She snorted. And what was he investigating? Had you really gone that far, Veronica? I didn't answer her, instead turning to Walt. I assume you brought the documents we talked about? He nodded and picked up the folder he was holding. It's all here, Mrs. Abernathy. Just like you asked for. What are you talking about? What documents? Hubert's voice was higher than usual, a touch of concern. Maybe we should continue this conversation in a more private setting, Walt suggested, glancing around the room full of curious guests. No, I said firmly. It would happen here, in front of all these people, like the humiliation you've subjected me to. Tabitha stepped forward. This is absurd. Her voice was cold and controlled, but I could see her fingers trembling. You're trying to ruin our party just because you couldn't bear to hand over the necklace. It's petty and undignified. It's not about the necklace, Tabitha, I said. Or rather, it wasn't just about the necklace. I turned to Walt. Tell them what you found out. Walt opened the folder and pulled out the first document, a printout of the photos. Mrs. Tabitha Woodcock Abernathy, owner of the New Wave Contemporary Art Gallery in Goodyear, he began in a professional tone. In the last 3 years, no less than 12 paintings of dubious provenance have been sold through your gallery, paintings that experts later determined to be forgeries. Tabitha's face paled, but she quickly pulled herself together. It's slander, she said. You don't have any proof. Walt pulled out another document. Here's an expert's report on a work supposedly by Davis Hockney, sold through your gallery for $350,000 to the Rycroft family. He placed it on the table next to him. And here is an expert opinion on the lost work of Jean-Michel Basquiat, which you sold to a collector from Chicago for $600,000. It's a forgery. Tabitha's face grew paler with each new document Walt pulled from his folder. The guests began to whisper, some of them open-mouthed. So what? Hubert intervened, trying to get the situation under control. Mistakes happen. Even experts sometimes make mistakes in determining the authenticity of works of art. Walt nodded as if he had expected this argument. Of course, Mr. Abernathy. Mistakes happen. Once, twice. But 12 times in 3 years? And always in your wife's favor? He pulled out another document. Bank statements. Here are the transfers from the New Wave Gallery account to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Interesting, isn't it? Especially when you consider that the transfer amounts match almost exactly the difference between the price Mrs. Abernathy allegedly purchased these works for and the price she sold them for. These are the financial operations of my business, Tabitha replied sharply. They're perfectly legal. Maybe, Walt agreed, but then why aren't these transactions reflected in the gallery's official books? Why aren't they mentioned in the tax returns? I noticed some of the guests beginning to move quietly toward the exit. The New York art critic with whom Tabitha had been talking so animatedly at dinner looked at her with undisguised contempt. Hubert stepped forward, his face contorted with anger. That is enough, he said. I will not allow this slander to continue in my house. I demand that everyone leave immediately. Now for the best part, Mr. Abernathy, Walt interrupted him, pulling out the next document. Your role in all this. Hubert froze, his eyes widening with fear. What are you talking about? The legal advice you gave your wife. The documents you drew up for the fake painting deals. Walt put another stack of papers on the table. The letters you sent to the experts, threatening legal action if they publicly stated their doubts about the authenticity of the work sold through your wife's gallery. One of the guests, a man in an impeccable suit who had been introduced to me as a partner in the law firm where Hubert worked, stepped closer and picked up one of the documents. As he read it, he looked at my son with unconcealed horror. Hubert, is this true? He asked. Did you really write this letter? Hubert opened his mouth, then closed it. His gaze darted between the document, his colleague, and me. It was a simple warning about the possible legal consequences of making unsubstantiated claims, he mumbled at last. Standard legal practice? Standard practice? His colleague interjected, threatening an expert with the destruction of his reputation if he publishes his professional opinion on a forgery? Do you realize that you are putting not only your reputation at risk, but the reputation of our entire firm? Tabitha, seeing the situation spinning out of control, tried to take the initiative. "This is ridiculous," she said loudly. "This whole thing is an attempt to smear us, and I know who's behind it." She turned to me, her eyes glittering with rage. "You never accepted me, Veronica. From the beginning, you've tried to destroy our marriage. And now that we're finally about to start a new life, you come in with these ridiculous accusations." "They're not accusations, Mrs. Abernathy," Walt replied calmly. "They're facts backed up by evidence. Evidence I've been collecting for the last 2 years. 2 years? Hubert looked at me in disbelief. "You've been following us for 2 years?" I held his gaze. I didn't want to believe that my son could have been involved in anything dishonest. But after Walt brought me the first proof, I couldn't turn a blind eye. "And what are you going to do with this evidence?" Hubert asked, his voice shaking with barely contained anger. "Disgrace your only son? Ruin his career? His marriage?" "I hoped I'd never have to use them," I answered honestly. "I hoped you come to your senses, that you would remember the values your father and I taught you. Honesty, decency, respect for family. And what changed?" He looked at me with challenge. "Why now?" "You know why?" I didn't look away. "Today you crossed the line. You publicly humiliated me. You ripped a family heirloom from my neck and gave it to a woman who, as you now know, is not only dishonest with me, but with the law." Tabitha made a strange sound, something between a chuckle and a sob. "You set this whole thing up," she said, running her hand around the room. "You let him rip the necklace off on purpose so you could have the moral authority to make us look like frauds in front of all those people." I shook my head. "No, Tabitha. It was your idea, not mine. You wanted the necklace at any cost. You encouraged Hubert to humiliate me publicly, and now you're taking the consequences of your actions, also publicly." Walt put another document on the table. "One more thing that might be of interest to those present, especially those who purchase works through the New Wave Gallery. We've compiled a complete list of the fakes sold, with the names of the buyers and the amounts of the transactions." A whisper swept through the room. Several people moved closer, trying to see the list. I noticed one of the guests, a middle-aged man I was seeing for the first time, turn pale when he saw his name on the document. This is impossible," he mumbled. "I paid almost $500,000 for this painting. Are you sure it's a fake?" "Absolutely," Walt nodded. "The expert report is in the folder. I can get you a copy if you want it." Tabitha began to panic. Her ostensible confidence evaporated, giving way to real fear. "Hubert," she whispered, "do something. Make it stop." Hubert looked lost. He shifted his gaze from his wife to the papers, from the papers to the guests, who looked at him with judgment and shock. "Yeah, I did, but you liked the money. You liked the status it brought. I watched my son and his wife publicly accuse each other of a crime they committed together. It was painful, but at the same time, I felt strangely relieved. Things were finally coming out. At last, the masks were being dropped." George Hampton, who had been standing beside me all this time, said quietly, "Arthur would be devastated to see this." "Yes," I agreed. But he also believed in justice, and today it had been served. A partner at the law firm where Hubert worked approached him and said something quietly. I could tell by the look on my son's face that the news was disappointing. He had probably already been notified of his suspension pending clarification. The New York art critic with whom Tabitha had hoped to collaborate defiantly put on his coat and headed for the exit, casting her a scornful glance. The guests began to leave, many without saying goodbye, some throwing indignant glances at Hubert and Tabitha. The party atmosphere had finally dissipated. Walt gathered the papers back into the folder and came over to me. "Anything else, Mrs. Abernathy?" I looked at my son and his wife standing in the center of the empty living room, surrounded by the accusing stares and whispers of the few guests who remained. "Yes," I replied. "The papers on the necklace." Walt nodded and pulled another smaller folder from his inside jacket pocket. "It's all here, just like you asked." I took the folder and walked toward Hubert and Tabitha. They looked at me with different expressions. He with a mixture of anger and shame, she with pure hatred. "Are you happy, Mom?" Hubert asked bitterly. You ruined my career, my reputation, my marriage, all in one night. I didn't ruin it all, Hubert, I replied calmly. Your own decisions brought you here. Your greed, your cowardice, and your willingness to betray your own mother for the woman who had manipulated you all these years. I turned to Tabitha, who was still wearing the necklace around her neck. And one more thing to take care of. I opened the folder and pulled out a document with an official seal. This is the certificate of authenticity and ownership of the Abernathy family ruby necklace, I said, showing the document. According to the will of my husband, Arthur Abernathy, the necklace belongs to me for life, and upon my death it passes not to his son, but to his nephew, Randall Abernathy. What? Hubert snatched the document out of my hands and looked it over quickly. That's impossible. Father would never. Arthur changed his will a month before he died, I interrupted him. After you missed his 70th birthday party because you were too busy at the resort with Tabitha, he realized that you no longer valued family tradition, that you weren't worthy of being the guardian of the Abernathy legacy. Tabitha clutched the necklace, her eyes widening in horror. It's a lie, she hissed. Another one of your lies to take it back. Look at the notary's seal, I replied calmly. Call McClintock's office and they'll authenticate the document. It's not a lie, Tabitha. And it means that the necklace you're wearing now was stolen from its rightful owner, me. Hubert continued to study the document, his face growing paler as he read. It is indeed Father's signature, he murmured at last. And the seal is real. Of course, I nodded. So now you understand what happened tonight. You didn't just humiliate me in public, you committed theft. And all your guests witnessed it. So now what? Hubert asked, his voice sounding hollow. Are you going to sue us after everything you've already done? I held out my hand. Give the necklace back and we'll forget about this incident, at least from a legal standpoint. Tabitha took a step back, covering the necklace with her hand. No, she cut off. Hubert gave it to me. It's mine. Tabitha, Hubert's voice sounded tired. Give her the damn necklace. We've embarrassed ourselves enough today. Never. Her eyes glittered feverishly. I deserved it. I'd put up with that woman for 10 years. I've put up with her judgment, her criticism, all for you, Hubert. And now you want me to give back the one thing I got in return? Hubert looked at his wife as if he were seeing her for the first time. Perhaps it was. Perhaps it was only now, when the masks were torn away, that he really saw who he had married. Give her the necklace, Tabitha, he repeated quietly but firmly. Now. Tabitha shifted her gaze from him to me, then back to him. For a moment I thought she was going to say no. But then she snatched the necklace from her neck and threw it to the floor between us. Take your bling, she said with contempt. It's not worth it. I bent down and picked up the necklace. The rubies glittered dimly in the chandeliers, as if they too were witnesses to everything that had happened today. I placed the jewelry gently in my palm, feeling its familiar weight. Thank you. I looked at my son, the handsome, successful man I had once held in my arms, whom I had read bedtime stories to, whom I had taught to know right from wrong. I have tried, Hubert, I said quietly, many times, but you wouldn't listen. You chose your path long ago, when you decided that status and money were more important than honesty and family. I gently released my hand from his grip. And you proved it again today when you decided to humiliate your mother in front of all those people. When you ripped the necklace off my neck and gave it to the woman who'd been using you all these years. I loved her, he whispered. Maybe, I nodded. But that's no excuse for your actions. George stepped toward me and offered his hand. Come on, Veronica, I'll take you home. I looked at my son and his wife one last time, standing in the middle of the empty living room, among the half-drunk glasses and half-eaten appetizers, among the scraps of their ruined reputations and careers. Goodbye, Hubert, I said. I hope that someday you will realize that I did not do this out of revenge, but out of love for your father's memory and for the boy you once were. Tabitha let out a scornful laugh, but Hubert remained silent, his eyes full of confusion. I turned and walked toward the exit, leaning on George's arm. Walt Prescott followed us, carrying his evidence folder. When we got outside, the cool evening air felt like the sweetest air I'd inhaled in a long time. I gripped the necklace tighter in my hand, feeling the rubies digging into my palm. "Are you okay?" George asked, helping me into his car. "Yes," I answered, surprised that it was true. For the first time in a long time, I was really okay. Walt stopped in front of the car. "What about the papers, Mrs. Abernathy? Are we going to transfer them somewhere?" I thought for a moment, looking at the folder in his hands. There was enough evidence in it to not only ruin Hubert's career and Tabitha's business, but to bring them both to justice. "No," I finally decided. "Keep it, Walt. Keep them in a safe place. We've done enough today." He nodded understandingly. "Whatever you say, Mrs. Abernathy, what's next?" "Next," I smiled, looking at the necklace in my palm. "I think it's time to visit Randall. He needs to know about his inheritance." I sat in the living room of my house, examining the necklace by the light of the table lamp. George Hampton was in the chair opposite, holding the glass of whiskey I had offered him after all I had been through. Walt Prescott took a seat by the window, silently watching us both. Night had fallen, but sleep seemed distant and inaccessible. The rubies in the necklace sparkled, catching the light, but something about them was off. Something elusive that only a very keen eye would notice, or one who knew the truth. "It looks almost real," George said, looking at the jewelry in my hands. "If I didn't know Arthur so well, I'd believe it too." I smiled, stroking the center stone, the largest ruby, supposedly brought from Burma by the first Abernathy. "Arthur was a master of his craft," I replied proudly. "He always said that the real art of a jeweler is not in expensive materials, but in the ability to give a thing a soul." "And when did he make this copy?" Walt asked, coming closer. I closed my eyes, remembering. It was almost 10 years ago, shortly before Arthur died. We knew of his illness then, knew that time was short. And among all the things he wanted to finish was this. 6 months before he died, I answered, opening my eyes. He was already worried about what would happen to the family heirlooms after he was gone. He'd seen the man Hubert was becoming. He saw the influence Tabitha had on him. "And he decided to create a copy of the necklace?" George clarified. "Why? Was he afraid it would be stolen?" "Not exactly." I shook my head. Arthur had always been a pragmatist. He understood that a real necklace was not just a piece of jewelry, but of considerable material value. Especially the center ruby, which, despite all the stories about its modest value, was actually valued by experts at 6 figures. I got up from the couch and walked over to the fireplace where there were photographs. One of them showed Arthur and me young and happy on our wedding day. I'm in a simple white dress, and around my neck is an Abernathy necklace. A real necklace. Arthur wasn't afraid of the theft, I continued, looking at the photograph. He was afraid Hubert would sell the necklace. He'd break it into individual stones and sell it for money. Or that Tabitha, once she had it, would do the same. They both always looked at things through the lens of their material value. I returned to the couch and picked up the necklace again. On closer inspection, the differences became obvious. The stones were a little lighter than real rubies should be. The cut was perfect, too perfect for 19th century work. But from the outside, in ordinary lighting, it was impossible to tell the fake from the original. Arthur would work on it at night when he thought I was asleep, I continued, sinking into my memories. I'd find him in the workshop at 3 in the morning, bent over the workbench. He created each stone with as much love and care as if it were a real precious ruby. "And he told you he was making a copy?" asked Walt, who always thought in practical terms. "Not right away," I smiled, remembering. "He tried to hide it at first. He said he was working on a commission for a special client. But at our age, after so many years of marriage, you can't hide things from your spouse." I knew him too well. George nodded, smiling understandingly. "Arthur was never good at lying, especially to you. One night I just came into the workshop and asked him bluntly, 'You're making a copy of the Abernathy necklace, aren't you?' And he confessed. I continued to stroke the stones, feeling their smoothness under my fingers. He told me about his fears, about his suspicions about Hubert and Tabitha, about changing his will." "And the real necklace?" Walt asked. "Where is it now?" "In a safety deposit box," I answered. "Arthur and I put it there as soon as the copy was ready. To be on the safe side, only Randall and I have access to the box, though he doesn't know about it. Randall Abernathy, Arthur's nephew, son of his younger brother. Unlike Hubert, he never pursued a career in the big city or ostentatious wealth. Instead, he followed in his uncle's footsteps and became a jeweler. He opened a small workshop in Crescent Hill, a 4-hour drive from Goodyear. He created unique jewelry, which was valued not for the cost of materials, but for the beauty and originality of design. Arthur always saw him as a kindred spirit. I looked up at George. Do you remember how he glowed when he showed me Randall's first pieces? How proud he was of him. George nodded, smiling at the memory. Of course he did. He always said that the true spirit of Abernathy lived in Randall. The same sense of the material, the same dedication to the craft. That's why Arthur decided the real necklace should go to him. I set the copy down on the table. Not because of blood kinship, but because of soul kinship. Because of the certainty that Randall would keep it, would value it not for its monetary value, but for its history, for its memory, for its connection to his ancestors. Did Hubert know about this change in the will? Walt asked. No, I shook my head. Arthur had decided it was best to keep it a secret, at least until it was obvious how Hubert would behave after his death. And how did he behave? George asked quietly. I sighed, remembering those hard days after Arthur's funeral. How Hubert and Tabitha had come to the house where I'd spent my entire marriage and started to look around at things. How I heard Tabitha whisper to him, "You must insist on your share of the inheritance. There are valuable things here." He was more concerned about what he would receive financially than he was about losing his father, I finally answered. On the day of the funeral, Hubert asked me about the jewelry Arthur had kept in the safe, the ones that had the most value on the market, and Tabitha had started asking about the necklace that same night. I covered my eyes, remembering the pain I'd felt then. Not the pain of my daughter-in-law's insolence, I was used to that, but the realization that Arthur had been right in his fears, that our son had indeed changed so much that even his father's death hadn't brought out his best qualities. And you decided to wear the fake, Walt said affirmatively, expecting them to try to get the necklace sooner or later. Yes, I opened my eyes and looked at the detective. This was Arthur's plan. If Hubert is really as we see him now, he told me, if greed and vanity have overcome everything else in him, he will surely try to get hold of the necklace, either for himself or for Tabitha. And he was right, George said quietly. Unfortunately, yes. I felt tears come to my eyes, and I quickly brushed them away. 6 years I waited. 6 years I'd carried that copy, watching Tabitha look at it greedily every time we met. How she questioned the value of the stones, the origins of the necklace, whether there were documents to prove its history. I got up and went to the window. The night was quiet, starry. Somewhere out there, on the other side of town, my son and his wife were experiencing the collapse of their reputations, their careers, perhaps their marriages. And though I was the cause of that derailment, I felt no satisfaction, only fatigue and sadness. You know what the saddest part is? I turned to my guests. If Hubert had just asked for a necklace, if he had said, "Mom, this is an important family heirloom and I'd like Tabitha to wear it," I might have agreed. I would have given him a copy and everyone would have been happy. But they chose the path of humiliation and public display of power. They got what they deserved, Walt said firmly. What they did to you today was unforgivable. Maybe. I sat back down on the couch. But I don't feel any joy from this revenge, only sadness that it had come to this point. George set the empty glass on the table and stepped forward. What are you going to do next, Veronica? With this copy, with the real necklace, with Randall? I took the replica necklace in my hands, letting the artificial rubies catch the light of the lamp. Tomorrow I'll go to Crescent Hill to see Randall, I answered. I'll tell him the truth. About Arthur's decision, about the real necklace, about what happened today. And the copy? Walt asked. I smiled as I looked at the jewelry. It was Arthur's last work, a work of art created by the hands of a true master. I would keep it as a memento of him, his foresight, his wisdom. I put the necklace back on the table and rose. It's getting late, gentlemen. I think we all need a rest after an evening like this. Walt and George got up as well. The detective gathered his papers into a folder, and George finished the rest of his whiskey. Can you handle it? He asked quietly as Walt stepped back toward the door. I can stay if you want. Thanks, George, but I'll be fine, I replied, squeezing his hand gratefully. In fact, I felt liberated, like the weight I've been carrying all these years has finally been lifted off my shoulders. He nodded, understanding. Call me when you get back from Randall's. I'd like to know how he'll take the news. I will, I promised. It had been 3 months since the night my life had taken an unexpected turn. 3 months since the day I'd gone to Crescent Hill to make a fresh start. 3 months since my son and his wife lost everything they thought they had built. I sit on the veranda of Randall's house, wrapped in a blanket, watching the first snow of this winter fall. Crescent Hill is nothing like Goodyear. How quickly what has been built over years crumbles when deceit and greed are at its core. Hubert lost his job at the law firm a week after the scandal at the party. His partners couldn't risk the firm's reputation, especially when his role in illegal counterfeit art transactions came to light. He was facing disbarment. The Bar Disciplinary Committee had launched an investigation, and although no official decision had yet been made, the outlook looked grim. Tabitha found herself under official investigation. Her gallery was closed, and she faced numerous lawsuits from collectors she had defrauded. Charges of fraud, forgery, tax evasion, the list grew daily. And then there are the reputational losses. In the art world, where trust is the foundation of everything, Tabitha was persona non grata. George Hampton kept me in the loop on all of this. He called once a week with news from Goodyear. How the society in which Hubert and Tabitha had once shone was now shunning them. How their former friends pretended they'd never met them. How the house on Oakhurst Street was put up for sale because they could no longer afford the luxurious life. I felt no joy at this news, only deafening pain and regret that it had come to this point. That my own son was capable not only of publicly humiliating his mother, but also of committing a crime. That money and status had become more important to him than honesty and family values. Randall came out onto the veranda, interrupting my musings. He handed me an envelope. "A letter from Goodyear," he said. "From Walt Prescott." I took the envelope, feeling my heart clench. Walt wrote rarely, and usually his letters contained important information. "Thank you," I replied, putting the envelope aside. I wasn't sure I was ready to read it now, in the light of day, when my soul was already full of heavy thoughts. Randall sat down next to me on the bench, reached out and squeezed my palm. "Bad news?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I shook my head. "But letters from Walt are rarely just friendly greetings." We sat in silence, watching the snowflakes swirl in the air and sink slowly to the ground. It was at times like this that I felt Arthur's absence most keenly. What would he do in my place? What would the same kindness, the same wisdom, the same ability to see the best in people? "I'm not sure he'd approve of everything I've done," I answered honestly. "Especially the way I'd used the information Walt had gathered to destroy Hubert's career." "You didn't destroy his career," Randall objected. "Hubert did that when he decided to help Tabitha in her schemes, when he chose money and status over honesty and the law. All you did was let the truth come out." I sighed, realizing he was right, but still feeling heavy in my heart. "You know what the weirdest thing is?" I looked out at the snow-covered garden. "I don't feel any satisfaction from their fall. No joy of revenge, only sadness and fatigue." "Because you weren't taking revenge." Randall squeezed my hand tighter. "You were defending yourself. You were protecting yourself, your dignity, Arthur's memory. And also because, against all odds, you still loved your son." I nodded, feeling tears come to my eyes. Of course I loved Hubert. He was my only child, the fruit of my and Arthur's love. Even after everything he'd done, I couldn't tear that love from my heart. But I've learned to live with the idea that sometimes love isn't enough. That sometimes you have to accept the fact that the person you love has made irreparable choices. "I think it's time for us to go inside," Randall said, looking out at the fading dusk. It was getting cold. I nodded and stood up, taking the envelope from Walt with me. It was warm and cozy inside the house. Randall had melted the fireplace, and the flames cast whimsical shadows on the living room walls. I settled into the chair by the fire, still holding the unopened envelope. "I'll cook dinner," Randall said. "You calm down and read the letter. Whatever it is, we'll get through it together. He went into the kitchen, and I was alone with the envelope. For a minute, I just stared at it, trying to gather my courage. Then I took a deep breath and opened the seal. Inside was a short letter, written in Walt Prescott's neat handwriting, and a newspaper clipping. I started at the letter. Dear Mrs. Abernathy, I hope this letter finds you in good health and tranquility. I promise to keep you informed of the developments concerning your son and his wife, and therefore I am writing now. As you know, the case against Tabitha Woodcock Abernathy has progressed rapidly. Too much evidence, too many defrauded collectors willing to testify against her. She was facing serious punishment, perhaps even imprisonment. As for Hubert, his situation was a little better, but not by much. The Bar Disciplinary Committee was about to rule that his license should be revoked, and without it, as you can imagine, his career would be over forever. But something unexpected happened. I enclose a newspaper clipping that will explain it better than I can. Sincerely, Walt Prescott. I put the letter aside and unfolded the newspaper clipping. It was an article from the Goodyear Daily News dated last week. The headline read, "Scandalous couple left the country under cover of night." I started reading, and with each word my surprise grew. According to the article, Hubert and Tabitha Abernathy fled the country shortly before they were to stand trial. They fled the country without an extradition treaty with the U.S., presumably with money that Tabitha had managed to transfer to offshore accounts before her assets were frozen. Left behind a home, a reputation, a career, everything they'd once held dear. I set the clipping aside, feeling a strange emptiness inside. Hubert had chosen flight rather than face the consequences of his actions. Chose Tabitha and her criminal ways over the chance to start over, albeit with a clean slate. It was the final touch to the portrait of the man my son had become, and that realization made it even more painful. Randall returned from the kitchen, wiping his hands with a towel. "Bad news?" he asked, noticing the look on my face. I held out the clipping to him. Hubert and Tabitha had fled the country, walked away from responsibility. Randall quickly ran his eyes over the article. "It's a shame," he said finally. "Not because they got away with it, but because it means they didn't learn anything. They didn't learn anything." I nodded, thinking the same thing. My son had chosen a path that distanced him from me even further than the geographical distance between us. "How do you feel?" Randall asked cautiously, sitting down across from me. I thought about it, trying to make sense of the tangle of emotions inside. Sadness, disappointment, a vague relief that it was finally over. It was all intertwined into one unbreakable knot. "A strange calmness," I said at last. It was as if the last thread tying me to the past had been severed. Now I could really move on without looking back. Randall nodded understandingly. "Maybe it's for the best. A fresh start for everyone." I got up and walked over to the small secretary in the corner of the room. I opened the top drawer and pulled out the case I'd brought with me from Goodyear 3 months ago. She went back to the chair and opened it, showing Randall the contents. On the black velvet was the real Abernathy necklace. I'd taken it out of the safety deposit box before I left, just as I'd planned. The rubies glittered in the firelight like live embers full of inner fire. "It's beautiful," Randall said quietly. "Even knowing I've seen a copy before, I'm amazed at the difference. The real stones have a kind of soul that can't be faked." "That's exactly what Arthur used to say," I smiled, remembering my husband. He believed that every stone has its own history, its own character. That a true jeweler should not just work it, but reveal its inner beauty. I closed the case and held it out to Randall. "It's yours," I said, "just as Arthur wanted it. You are the true heir to the spirit of Abernathy." Randall looked stunned. "But you can still wear it," he objected. "It should be with you as long as I live?" I smiled softly. "No, Randall. It's time for me to let go of the past, too. I've worn this necklace for 50 years since the day I married Arthur. Now it's time to pass the baton on." He took the case but didn't open it, just held it in his hands as if he wasn't sure what to do next. "What should I do with it?" he asked at last. "Whatever you think is right," I answered. "Keep it as a memento of your uncle, of family history. Wear it for special occasions if you want, or just know that you have it." A piece of the Abernathy legacy now in your hands. And the copy? Randall asked. Do you still want to keep it? Yes, I nodded. It was Arthur's last work, a symbol of his love and care. I'll wear it with pride, knowing that the real necklace is in safe hands. Randall placed the case carefully on the table and walked over to me. He knelt down next to my chair and took my hands in his. Thank you, he said simply, for trusting me, for being a part of my life, for letting me be a part of yours. I felt the tears come to my eyes again, but this time not from grief or disappointment, but from gratitude. For the fact that there was still room for love and care in my life, despite all the losses. I should be thanking you, I replied, squeezing his hands, for taking me in when I needed a new home, for reminding me that family isn't just about blood ties, but about the choices we make every day. We sat like that for a while in silence, broken only by the crackling of the wood in the fireplace. Snow continued to fall outside the window, covering the world with a white blanket, as if suggesting a fresh start. Dinner's probably ready by now, Randall said at last, rising. Shall we go? I nodded and got up too. I paused for a second, looking at the necklace case on the table. I thought about the long journey that had brought me here, the decisions I'd made, the losses and gains. I felt no joy at what had happened to Hubert and Tabitha. I didn't feel satisfaction at their fall, but I felt a deep, quiet relief that I was finally free. Free from the weight of deception, from the burden of pretense, from the pain of unrealized hopes. I turned and followed Randall into the kitchen, leaving behind the necklace, the newspaper clipping, and all thoughts of the past. Ahead was dinner with a man who had become closer to me than many blood relatives. Ahead was a new life in a quiet town where I could just be Veronica, not the widow of a famous jeweler or the mother of a lawyer caught up in a scandal. There was a future ahead of me that I could build on my own by choice. And that, perhaps, was the true legacy Arthur had left me, not the gems, but the freedom to choose, the courage to follow my heart, the ability to start over no matter how old you were. I smiled thinking about it. Perhaps this is how the story of the Abernathy necklace should have ended up. Not in a museum, not in a private collection, not even in the hands of a direct heir, but in the hands of someone who understands the true value of things. A value that is not measured in money, but in love, memory, and respect for the past. And that was the main lesson I learned from all that happened. The true legacy is not in things, but in the values we pass on, the qualities and actions that define us as human beings, the choices we make every day.